During a fancy dinner with his law firm partners at his penthouse, the millionaire attorney asked the nanny a legal question to make fun of her. Seconds later, his wife laughed out loud. The Harper family was the picture of success. David Harper, a towering figure in the legal world, commanded respect in every courtroom he entered. Known for his steely resolve and unrelenting drive, he had earned a reputation as the attorney you wanted on your side when the stakes were high. Outside of the office, his image as a doting father and dedicated husband completed the perfect narrative. The city admired him, colleagues envied him, and rivals begrudgingly respected him. But beneath the polished exterior, the truth was far less idyllic. At home, David was a man consumed by ambition. His focus on maintaining his professional dominance left little energy for the finer details of family life. While he remembered to send extravagant gifts for anniversaries and birthdays, he often missed the events themselves. Tangled up in yet another high-profile case, his wife, Laura, knew this routine well. She had once been captivated by his ambition, swept away by his promises of a life filled with success. Over time, those promises had come to feel like golden handcuffs. Laura Harper had mastered the art of appearances. At every gala, charity luncheon, or school event, she shone with effortless grace. The media adored her as the quintessential socialite, charming, elegant, and impeccably dressed. She took great care to craft this image, concealing the strains of a marriage that had grown colder with each passing year. Her smile could disarm a room, but in the quiet hours after the children were asleep, it often faded into something more brittle. Emily and Noah, the Harper children, were too young to understand the nuances of their parents' dynamic, but they felt the distance in their own ways. Emily, 7 years old and wise beyond her years, had developed a knack for reading moods. She often acted as a peacemaker, sensing when her father's stress levels were high or when her mother's patience was fraying. Noah, 5 and full of boundless energy, still clung to the hope that each day might bring a moment of his father's attention. David's fleeting displays of affection, a tousle of the hair, a quick compliment, felt monumental to the little boy, yet those moments were few and far between. More often, David would bury himself in his home office, the glow of his computer screen casting shadows on the walls. The children learned early not to disturb him unless it was absolutely necessary. Laura filled the gaps as best she could, hiring tutors, enrolling the kids in extracurriculars, and orchestrating playdates. But no number of activities could replace the longing in their eyes when they asked, "Will Dad be home for dinner tonight?" Laura had her ways of coping. She busied herself with planning charity fundraisers and managing her social calendar, all while keeping up with the relentless pace of motherhood. To the outside world, she and David were a power couple, effortlessly juggling their roles. But inside the Harper mansion, the cracks in their perfect facade grew wider by the day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and rose, Emily sat on the window seat of her bedroom. She hugged her favorite stuffed bunny and stared out at the world beyond the gates of their estate. She didn't have the words to articulate her feelings, but she sensed something was missing. Her father's promises of next time felt like distant stars, visible but unreachable. Down the hall, Laura prepared for yet another event. She stood before the gilded mirror in her dressing room, adjusting the clasp of a diamond necklace. The woman staring back at her looked polished, even radiant, but Laura couldn't ignore the emptiness in her reflection. She sighed and reached for her lipstick, layering it on like armor. David emerged from his office, his phone glued to his ear. His voice was sharp, decisive, as he discussed strategies with a junior partner. Laura glanced at him as he walked by, her expression unreadable. She waited until he ended the call before speaking. "Will you be joining us for dinner tomorrow? The kids would love to see you." Her tone was light, casual, but the question carried more weight than she let on. David didn't look up from his phone as he scrolled through emails. "I'll try, but no promises." "Big meeting in the morning." Laura's lips pressed into a thin line. She had heard that answer too many times before. As the evening wore on, the Harper home settled into its familiar rhythm. Emily tucked Noah into bed, reading him a story she had practically memorized by now. Laura retreated to the quiet of her room, scrolling through social media feeds filled with smiling faces and family milestones. And David, as always, worked late into the night, the hum of his laptop filling the silence. The Harpers' front door opened to reveal Sophia Bennett, a petite woman in her mid-20s with warm eyes and a reassuring smile. Her caramel-colored hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and the faintest hint of nervous excitement colored her features. She stood on the doorstep holding a modest leather bag, a striking contrast to the grandeur of the Harper estate. Despite the polished surroundings, her presence felt natural, as though she belonged. Even before stepping inside, Laura greeted her with a gracious smile, ushering her into the sprawling foyer. The children peeked around the corner, curious about the newcomer. Emily, ever observant, was the first to approach. Her gaze swept over Sophia as if she were trying to decipher whether this stranger could be trusted. Noah followed close behind, less reserved, clutching his favorite toy truck. Sophia crouched down to their level and introduced herself with an easy warmth that put them both at ease. "You must be Emily and Noah," she said. "I've heard so many wonderful things about you." Emily tilted her head, scrutinizing her. "You're the new nanny." "That's right," Sophia replied. "And I think we're going to have a lot of fun together." Noah grinned. "Do you like playing hide and seek?" "I love it," Sophia answered without hesitation. "But I'm pretty good at finding hiding spots, so you'll have to get creative." Laura watched the interaction unfold, relief flickering across her face. She had been nervous about finding the right person for this role, someone who could provide the stability her children needed while seamlessly fitting into their unusual household dynamic. Sophia seemed to embody exactly what she had hoped. Sophia's journey to this moment hadn't been easy. A college student juggling a rigorous academic schedule and part-time jobs, she had applied for the nanny position out of necessity. The ad had stood out: a live-in role with competitive pay, ideal for someone balancing responsibilities. She hadn't expected to hear back, but when Laura called to arrange an interview, Sophia knew she had to make a strong impression. During the meeting, Laura was struck by Sophia's calm demeanor and the quiet confidence she exuded. Unlike other candidates who had recited rehearsed answers, Sophia spoke candidly about her love for working with children and her aspirations to become an educator. Her genuine approach resonated with Laura, who had grown tired of people trying to impress her with grandiose claims. By the end of the interview, Laura felt certain she had found the right person. David, however, was less convinced. He barely acknowledged Sophia's presence when Laura introduced her as the new nanny. His handshake was perfunctory, his expression impassive. He muttered something polite before retreating to his office, leaving Sophia to navigate the intricacies of her new role without his involvement. "She seems fine," David had said to Laura later that evening, his tone dismissive. "But we don't need her getting too comfortable. Just make sure she does her job." Laura had brushed off his remarks, choosing to focus on the positives. Her instincts told her that Sophia was exactly what the children needed, and she wasn't about to let David's skepticism interfere. Sophia settled into the household quickly, her natural charm winning over Emily and Noah within days. She introduced new routines, transforming mealtimes and bedtime rituals into moments of connection. She read stories with vivid animation, eliciting giggles and gasps from the children, and joined them in building elaborate pillow forts that filled the living room with laughter. For Emily, Sophia's presence felt like a breath of fresh air. She admired how the nanny always took her thoughts seriously, listening intently and asking questions as though Emily's opinions truly mattered. For Noah, Sophia became a source of unfiltered joy. He delighted in the way she joined his games wholeheartedly, never treating his imaginative adventures as trivial. Laura watched these interactions with quiet gratitude. She noticed how the children's eyes lit up around Sophia, how their laughter seemed freer, less guarded. It was as though Sophia had unlocked a part of them that had been tucked away for safekeeping. But not everyone shared the sentiment. David remained distant. His interactions with Sophia were limited to polite nods and curt instructions. He rarely looked up from his phone or laptop when she was in the room, giving the impression that her presence barely registered. One evening, as Sophia helped Noah clean up his scattered toys, David appeared in the doorway. His tone was brisk, his words directed more at Laura than at Sophia. "Are we certain she can handle this? These kids need discipline, not someone playing games all day." Sophia paused, taken aback by his bluntness. Laura stepped in quickly, her voice firm but measured. "Sophia is doing a wonderful job, David. The children adore her, and I've seen nothing but positive changes since she started." David's gaze flicked to Sophia, his expression unreadable. "We'll see," he said before turning on his heel and disappearing down the hall. The tension lingered long after he left the room. Sophia felt a pang of self-doubt. Sophia quickly pushed her self-doubt aside. Her focus was on Emily and Noah, who needed her unwavering support regardless of their father's reservations. Days turned into weeks, and Sophia's bond with the children deepened. She helped Emily prepare for her school spelling bee, practicing words until Emily felt confident. She coaxed Noah out of a tantrum with gentle humor, teaching him how to articulate his feelings instead of lashing out. Despite David's initial skepticism, even he couldn't ignore the subtle changes in the household. The children seemed happier and more secure. Laura seemed less stressed, her smiles more genuine. Though David still kept Sophia at arm's length, there were moments when his disapproval softened. Moments he would never admit, not even to himself. Sophia remained focused on her role, refusing to let David's aloofness overshadow her purpose. She had come to the Harper household to make a difference, and every hug from Noah and every proud smile from Emily reminded her that she was exactly where she needed to be. The Harper household began to shift in small but meaningful ways. Sophia's presence brought a warmth that Emily and Noah had longed for, even if they couldn't put it into words. Afternoons were now filled with bursts of creativity, finger painting, baking cookies, and scavenger hunts in the garden. Emily, who had always been more reserved, blossomed under Sophia's encouragement. When Sophia suggested they write a play together, Emily threw herself into the project, crafting a script and even designing costumes. Noah found an endless source of adventure in Sophia. She never dismissed his ideas, no matter how wild. When he decided to build a rocket ship out of cardboard boxes, Sophia not only helped him gather materials but also pretended they were blasting off to the moon. Laura noticed the changes immediately. There was less tension in the air, fewer tantrums from Noah, and a newfound confidence in Emily's demeanor. For the first time in a long while, the house felt more like a home. Laura often paused in the middle of her tasks to watch Sophia with the children, her heart swelling with gratitude. However, even amidst these positive changes, there were moments of unease when she saw how David remained unchanged. Sophia had a knack for observing without drawing attention to herself, and it didn't take long for her to notice the cracks in David's polished exterior. His interactions with the children were brief, often staged for photos, but once the camera was put away, his attention shifted back to his phone or laptop. Sophia also noticed how David spoke to Laura, curt and transactional, as though she were a business partner rather than his wife. One evening, as Sophia cleaned up after dinner, she overheard a conversation between David and Laura in the dining room. Laura had suggested they take a weekend trip to the lake house, thinking it might bring them closer as a family. David's response was as dismissive as it was predictable. "You know my schedule, Laura. I can't just drop everything for a spontaneous getaway." Laura's voice was measured, but there was a weariness beneath it. "It's not spontaneous, David. I've been asking you about this for weeks." But David barely glanced up from his phone. Sophia busied herself with stacking dishes, pretending not to hear, but the exchange lingered in her mind. Another piece of the puzzle that made up the fragile dynamic of the Harper family. She felt a growing frustration toward David but kept it to herself, focusing instead on the positive changes she could make for the children. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Emily curled up on the couch with Sophia, flipping through a picture book they had just read. As Sophia reached over to close her bag, the corner of a textbook peeked out, its title partially obscured. Emily's sharp eyes caught it immediately. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. Sophia hesitated, then quickly tucked the book away. "It's just some boring stuff for school," she said lightly. Emily's curiosity only deepened. "What kind of school are you a student at?" Sophia smiled, ruffling Emily's hair playfully. "Sort of. I'm just studying a little on the side, nothing exciting." "Is it hard?" Emily asked, furrowing her brow. "It can be," Sophia admitted, "but it's good to challenge yourself, right?" Emily nodded thoughtfully, but Sophia could tell her mind was still turning. She made a mental note to be more discreet in the future, knowing the last thing she wanted was for her personal life to overshadow the focus she had placed on the children. Later that night, as the house fell quiet, Sophia sat in her room, the faint hum of rain against the windows her only companion. She pulled out the textbook and flipped it open, scanning the pages with a mix of determination and exhaustion. This was her secret, the part of herself she kept hidden from everyone in the Harper household. Sophia wasn't just a nanny. She was also a law student, working toward a degree that represented the dream she had been chasing for years. Balancing her studies with her responsibilities to the Harper family wasn't easy, but Sophia thrived on the challenge. What she hadn't anticipated was how much she would come to care for Emily and Noah, or how much she would quietly root for Laura, a woman who seemed to be navigating her own silent battles. As the rain softened into a gentle patter, Sophia closed her book and leaned back in her chair, her thoughts drifting to Emily's inquisitive expression and Noah's boundless energy. They deserved more than what they had been given, and Sophia was determined to be a positive force in their lives for as long as she could. Down the hall, Laura stood by the window in her bedroom, watching the rain trail down the glass. She thought about the small moments of joy Sophia had brought to the household, the way the children had blossomed under her care. A quiet hope stirred in her heart, a hope that perhaps things could still change, that the threads of their family could be rewoven. But as she glanced at David, already asleep with his phone still clutched in his hand, she felt the weight of reality settle over her once more. Sophia, too, felt the heaviness of the Harper family's unspoken struggles, but she wasn't one to back away from challenges. As she turned off the light and settled into bed, she resolved to keep doing what she could. One small moment, one shared laugh, one act of kindness at a time. The following evening, David stood in the center of the living room, surveying the preparations for a dinner party with a critical eye. Every detail had been meticulously planned: floral arrangements, imported wine, and custom-printed menus. The penthouse was transformed into a glittering stage with David cast as the leading man. Laura leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the flurry of activity around her. She had hosted countless events over the years, but tonight, the weight of it all felt heavier. The perfection David demanded came at a cost, and more often than not, it was Laura who paid the price. "It's just one night," David had said earlier, brushing off her concerns about the children's bedtime routine being disrupted. "Everything needs to be flawless. You can manage that, right?" Laura had bitten back her response, knowing it wouldn't make a difference. She had long since mastered the art of swallowing her frustrations and smiling through her discontent. Still, as she adjusted the angle of a centerpiece for the third time, she felt a flicker of resentment. Her life had become an endless cycle of managing appearances, ensuring every event reflected the image David was so determined to maintain. "Laura, could you make sure the wine glasses are arranged properly?" David's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and demanding. He barely looked up from his phone. "They're fine, David," she replied evenly. "I've checked twice." Sophia entered the room, carrying Noah on her hip, with Emily trailing behind her. The children had been curious about the commotion all afternoon, drawn to the unfamiliar energy buzzing through the penthouse. "Mom, why are there so many plates?" Emily asked, her wide eyes darting toward the long dining table. "We're having some guests over for dinner," Laura explained, her tone light but distracted. "It's a special night for Daddy." Noah, still in Sophia's arms, craned his neck to see more. "Can we come to the dinner?" he asked, his voice full of hope. "Not tonight, sweetheart," Laura said gently. "You'll have dinner in the playroom with Sophia." Sophia smiled reassuringly at the children. "We're going to have our own little party," she said. Sophia's answer hung in the air, the weight of it shifting the atmosphere in the room. David's smile faltered, his smug expression now replaced with a subtle tension. He glanced at the other men in the room, trying to maintain his composure. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "it's impressive you've been paying attention." His voice was tight, his usual confidence slipping for a moment. Sophia's heart raced, but she kept her gaze steady, feeling a rush of satisfaction. She wasn't about to let him make her feel small. The shift in energy was palpable. The colleagues who had once regarded her as a mere background figure now looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. A partner at the table, an older man with gray hair and a friendly demeanor, leaned forward intrigued. "You know your stuff, Sophia," he said, his voice warm. "I'm surprised. Maybe we need someone like you on the team." David, clearly caught off guard, gave a tight laugh. "Sophia's not exactly in a position to join the firm," he said, trying to steer the conversation back, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. Sophia didn't flinch. It's all about understanding the law and how it impacts real lives, right? She said, her tone calm and measured. Whether you're in the courtroom or in a situation like the one I just outlined, it's about finding the truth. The room was quiet for a moment, the murmurs of surprise turning into reluctant admiration. David didn't speak again immediately, his earlier showmanship now overshadowed by the realization that Sophia had more to offer than he'd ever imagined. Sophia turned to leave, but not before exchanging a quick glance with Laura. The brief look was enough, a wordless acknowledgement that, despite the strained dynamics, they both understood the weight of the moment. As Sophia stepped out of the room, she felt a quiet sense of pride welling inside her. She had held her ground. Back in the playroom, the night had wound down. Emily and Noah were deep in their dreams, their innocent faces peaceful. Sophia sat by their beds for a moment longer, the faint sound of the party still echoing in the distance, a stark contrast to the serenity of the room. She felt a pang of gratitude. Despite everything, these children were hers to care for, even if it was only for a short while. The party, the pretensions, the games. All of it was far removed from the simple truth of her role, to make sure they felt safe, loved, and heard. In that moment, Sophia knew that no matter what happened in the future, she had done more than just babysit. She had made a real difference in their lives. The future was uncertain, but she would keep fighting for them, one small moment at a time. Sophia's words had left a mark, and the ripples of that evening lingered far longer than she'd expected. As she glanced at David, she noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor, a momentary flicker of uncertainty in his usually confident gaze. But it was Laura who had truly upended the atmosphere, her genuine laugh piercing the tension like a ray of sunshine after a storm. "Well," David had said, trying to recover, but the cracks were beginning to show. "It seems I've hired someone with hidden talents." Laura's response was a sharp one, filled with both amusement and something more, a quiet defiance that Sophia hadn't anticipated. "You should be taking notes," Laura said, her voice laced with a playful challenge, but underneath it, a real acknowledgement of Sophia's strength. The room buzzed with a mix of admiration and surprise, the usual polished professionalism replaced by genuine intrigue. As the evening wore on, and the party wound down, the last of the guests filtered out, their voices and laughter slowly dissipating into the night. Sophia lingered in the kitchen, rinsing the final glasses. As she moved toward the door, she found Laura leaning against the counter, her emerald dress catching the light, and her expression warm despite the events that had unfolded. "You completely floored them," Laura said with a laugh, her voice low but full of appreciation. Sophia smiled, the modesty she had grown accustomed to shining through. "I wasn't trying to cause a scene." Laura shook her head, her eyes glimmering with a quiet understanding. "You didn't," she replied. "You just reminded everyone, including David, that there's more to you than they realize." Sophia hesitated, then glanced toward David, who stood by the window, his posture stiff and rigid. The weight of the evening seemed to settle in, but the satisfaction of standing her ground lingered in Sophia's chest. "You're welcome," Sophia said softly, her voice almost to herself. She hadn't intended to upstage David, but there was something empowering about holding her own, about proving that she had a place at the table, no matter how much they tried to belittle her role. But when the last of the guests were gone, and the penthouse was quiet again, the tension in the air seemed thicker than ever. David, his hands tight around his wine glass, stood by the window. His back was to the room, but it felt as if the silence itself was pressing in on him. Sophia stepped out from the kitchen, her coat and purse in hand. She caught Laura's eye as she moved past, the unspoken understanding between them more powerful than words. As she prepared to leave, David's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "I hope you're proud of yourself," he said, his tone sharp, dripping with a bitterness that only added to the tension of the room. Sophia paused, unsure if he was addressing her or Laura. His eyes locked onto hers as he continued. "You just couldn't resist, could you? Laughing like that, encouraging her, making me look like a fool in front of my colleagues." Laura, ever composed, folded her arms and met his glare head-on. "You did that all on your own, David." The sharpness in Laura's voice made Sophia pause mid-step. There was no room left for misunderstanding. This wasn't just about her. It was about everything David had built. The illusions, the walls of perfection he had created around himself and his family. It was all starting to crumble. David's voice was cold, dismissive. You think because you spouted a few legal terms you belong in the conversation? He sneered. Let me remind you, you're here to look after my children, not humiliate me. Sophia's heart tightened, but she stood tall. With all due respect, Mr. Harper, I didn't try to show you up. You put me on the spot, and I simply answered. Laura was quick to snap, her voice firm and unwavering. David, that's enough. But David was far from finished. You think just because you can use a few big words, you think you're part of this conversation? His voice was sharp, his sneer returning. Let me remind you, you're here to look after my children, not embarrass me. Sophia, feeling the weight of it all, took a slow, steady breath. You're right. I am here for Emily and Noah. And they're the only reason I've put up with this. David's anger faltered for a brief moment. Surprise flashed across his features. It was fleeting but undeniable. Sophia's gaze softened as she turned to Laura. I love your children more than I can say. But I can't stay here anymore. Laura's expression faltered. The disappointment in her eyes was clear, but there was understanding there too. She wanted to fight for her marriage, but she had her own breaking point. Sophia looked at her one last time, shaking her head softly. They deserve so much more than this. Without waiting for a response, Sophia walked toward the door. Laura stood still, watching her leave, but her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were ready to confront the truth she had been avoiding for far too long. David, too, stood silent. Laura finally turned to face him, her voice trembling but strong. This is exactly what I mean, David, she said, her eyes blazing with restrained fury. You treat everyone like they're beneath you, like they exist solely to prop you up. For what? Your career? Your ego? Because it's certainly not for this family. David's face hardened, but he didn't speak, didn't interrupt. The truth was like a weight in the room, suffocating the air between them. Laura's voice rose, her frustration growing. Do you have any idea how tired I am of smiling through your dismissiveness? Of cleaning up the messes you leave behind, while you're too busy posturing for people who don't care about you beyond what you can do for them? Her words stung him, and he winced, but she didn't stop. When we met, you were ambitious, yes. But you cared about people. About me. Somewhere along the way, you stopped caring. You started treating me like part of your image, not a person. Her voice trembled, but she didn't hold back. And now, I don't even know who you are anymore. David opened his mouth to speak, but his words faltered. His voice was strained as he finally spoke. Laura, this is unfair. Unfair, she repeated, her voice incredulous. Unfair is how you treat your own children. They barely know you, David. You're a stranger to them. The pain in her words cut through him, and he stepped closer, but she held up a hand to stop him. I don't need an apology, she said quietly. I need change. And if you can't give me that, then I need to walk away, for me and for the kids. David's face softened, and the enormity of her words sank in. The realization hit him like a cold wave, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He stood there in the quiet aftermath, a man finally confronting the truth he had been running from. By morning, David knew he couldn't let things stand as they were. He left a voicemail for Sophia, humble, uncharacteristically sincere, asking if they could meet. He didn't reveal everything. He wasn't sure she would agree to see him at all, but he knew it was the first step towards something that had to change. At the law firm, the hustle and bustle continued. Papers shuffled, phones rang, and contracts were signed. But for David Harper, the weight of his own decisions loomed large. David had called an unscheduled meeting with the firm's senior team, raising eyebrows and stirring curiosity. The partners arrived promptly, their expressions a mix of interest and confusion. Sophia entered shortly after, her expression cautious but composed. She wore a simple blazer and slacks, her hair pulled back neatly, quite different from her usual attire at the Harper household, but it suited her. She looked every bit as capable and determined as she had sounded the night before. Mr. Harper, she greeted, her tone polite but distant. You asked to see me? David rose from his seat at the head of the conference table, gesturing for her to sit. Sophia, thank you for coming. I realize this is unexpected. She hesitated but took the chair nearest the door, her posture guarded. The partners exchanged glances, their curiosity deepening. David took a steadying breath and addressed the room. Before we begin, I want to explain why I called this meeting. Last night, at the dinner party, I behaved in a way that was unprofessional and, frankly, unacceptable. My actions were rooted in arrogance, and I allowed my ego to overshadow my judgment. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, though she remained silent. The partners looked at one another, clearly intrigued. I directed that behavior at Sophia, David continued, his gaze meeting hers directly. I attempted to demean her in front of my colleagues, assuming she wouldn't be able to rise to the challenge I unfairly imposed. Not only was I wrong, but I was also deeply disrespectful, and for that, Sophia, I owe you an apology. The room fell silent. Sophia blinked, clearly caught off guard. Mr. Harper, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, David replied, his tone earnest. But I want you to know that I mean this. I've spent too much time focused on maintaining an image, projecting strength without considering how my actions affect the people around me. That needs to change. One of the senior partners, a woman named Evelyn, leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. David, this is unexpected, but I'm glad to see you owning up to your behavior. It's not easy to admit when we've been wrong. David nodded, then turned back to Sophia. You deserve more than just an apology. Your response last night demonstrated intelligence, composure, and a deep understanding of the law. It's clear you have an extraordinary future ahead of you, and I want to support that. Sophia tilted her head, skepticism flickering across her face. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'd like to offer you an internship here at the firm, David said. It would be part-time, allowing you to continue your studies, but it would also give you access to the resources and mentorship you deserve. I see your potential, and I believe in it. The room murmured again, this time with a mix of surprise and approval. Sophia's expression shifted from disbelief to something softer, though she still seemed hesitant. Mr. Harper, I don't know if I can accept. After everything that happened, this feels complicated. David nodded, his tone sincere. I understand. This offer isn't about erasing what happened. It's about making amends in a way that reflects your worth. You're under no obligation to say yes, but I hope you'll consider it. Sophia sat back, her mind clearly racing. She glanced around the room, noting the genuine interest on the faces of the partners. Finally, she looked back at David, her expression unreadable. Thank you, she said after a long pause. I'll need some time to think about it. Take all the time you need, David replied, relief softening his features. The offer stands whenever you're ready. Sophia nodded and stood, her composure intact despite the whirlwind of emotions clearly brewing beneath the surface. I appreciate the opportunity and the apology, she said, and as she left the room, the partners turned their attention back to David. Evelyn was the first to speak, her tone laced with approval. I have to say, David, this is the most human I've ever seen you. It's a good look. David managed a faint smile, though his thoughts were still on Sophia. The room began to clear as the partners returned to their schedules, leaving David alone in the conference room. He exhaled deeply, the weight of the morning pressing against him. It wasn't often that he allowed himself to feel vulnerable, but he knew this was a step in the right direction. Sophia walked through the bustling halls of the firm, her thoughts racing. She hadn't expected David's apology, let alone the offer. The sincerity in his words had caught her off guard, and she couldn't deny the potential opportunity it represented. Still, trust wasn't something she could give lightly, not after everything. As she stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, Sophia found herself standing at a crossroads. The choice ahead wasn't just about an internship. It was about whether she believed in the possibility of real change, not just for David but for herself. And though the answer wasn't clear yet, she felt a flicker of hope she hadn't expected. Sophia sat at her modest desk in a quiet corner of the Harper law firm, the weight of her decision slowly giving way to excitement. Accepting the internship hadn't been an easy choice. Her love for Emily and Noah made leaving her nanny role bittersweet. But she knew this opportunity was too valuable to pass up. The transition was smooth. She still visited the children often, sometimes bringing small surprises for their playdates while she adjusted to her new work world. Her first days as an intern were challenging but exhilarating, and the feeling of finally stepping into the career she'd been dreaming of made the long nights of studying worthwhile. At the Harper household, change was also underway. Laura, true to her commitment to find someone exceptional for the children, began interviewing potential nannies. This time, David joined her for every conversation. He asked thoughtful questions, genuinely interested in how each candidate would approach nurturing Emily and Noah. For the first time in years, Laura saw a version of David she thought might have disappeared, a man who wasn't just invested in his image but was beginning to truly invest in his family. When Laura found a promising candidate, a warm and creative young woman named Becca, it was David who sealed the deal. "You seem to understand how important it is to be present for them," he said during the interview, surprising even Laura. "They need someone who truly sees them." Becca started the following week, and it didn't take long for her to win over the children with her artistic flair and genuine kindness. Just as the household began finding its new rhythm, David made an announcement over dinner one night that left everyone stunned. "We're going on a family vacation," he declared, setting down his fork. "Just the four of us." Emily's eyes widened with excitement, and Noah clapped his hands. "Where are we going?" he asked eagerly. David smiled, glancing at Laura. "I thought we could go to the lake house. It's been too long, and it'll give us a chance to spend some real time together." Laura's initial surprise softened into cautious hope. The lake house was where they had shared some of their happiest memories before life grew so complicated. It wasn't just the idea of the trip that touched her. It was the fact that David had planned it himself, with no ulterior motive beyond reconnecting with his family. The drive to the lake house was filled with chatter and laughter, a stark contrast to the strange silence that used to dominate family car rides. David and Laura took turns playing silly games with the children, and even Noah's boundless energy couldn't wear down their spirits. By the time they arrived, the sight of the familiar cabin nestled among the trees brought smiles to everyone's faces. The days that followed were simple but transformative. David took Emily fishing, patiently teaching her how to cast her line, while Noah helped Laura gather wildflowers by the shore. In the evenings, they played board games by the fireplace, the sound of their laughter filling the cabin. For the first time in years, David wasn't checking his phone or taking calls during meals. Instead, he was present, listening, engaging, and showing his family the side of himself they had almost forgotten. One night, after the children had fallen asleep, David and Laura sat on the porch, watching the stars reflect on the still water. David reached for her hand, his touch tentative. "I know I have a long way to go," he said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm trying for us, for the kids. I'm trying to be the man you deserve." Laura turned to him, her expression softening. "I can see that," she said, her voice gentle. "And it means more than you know." The trip became a turning point, not just for David, but for the entire family. Back at home, David continued making small but meaningful changes, taking Emily to school, attending Noah's soccer games, and setting aside time every evening for family dinners. Laura, seeing his efforts, began to let go of some of the resentment she had carried for so long. Slowly but surely, the emotional distance that had once defined their marriage began to fade. Months later, Sophia stood on the stage at her law school graduation, her name ringing out as she walked across to accept her diploma. The applause was thunderous, and when she looked out into the crowd, her heart swelled at the sight of her parents, siblings, and a few familiar faces from the Harper family. Laura waved enthusiastically, while David offered a polite but genuine smile. Emily and Noah cheered the loudest, their voices cutting through the noise. After the ceremony, Sophia made her way through the crowd, her diploma clutched tightly in her hands. When she reached the Harpers, she was met with hugs from the children and a warm embrace from Laura. David stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Congratulations, Sophia," he said, his voice steady but sincere. "You've worked hard, and you've earned every bit of this." "Thank you," she replied, shaking his hand. He hesitated, then added, "I also want to thank you, not just for what you did for my children, but for the lessons you taught me. You've made me a better man, and I'll always be grateful for that." Sophia blinked, touched by his words. "I think you taught yourself that, Mr. Harper." I just held up the mirror. The moment was brief but profound, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had both come. Sophia's career began to take shape soon after. The law firm, impressed by her intelligence and dedication, offered her a permanent position as a junior lawyer. Her first day in her new role felt surreal, the culmination of years of perseverance and sacrifice. As she settled into her new office, she pinned a small photo to the corkboard above her desk, one of her with Emily and Noah on one of their last playdates. It was a reminder of where she started and the people who had shaped her journey. Back at the Harper household, life was far from perfect, but it was undeniably better. David continued his efforts to prioritize his family, and Laura found herself smiling more often, her hope renewed. The children thrived, their laughter once again a constant presence in the home. Sophia's story had intertwined with theirs for a time, leaving an indelible mark. And as they each moved forward on their separate paths, there was a shared understanding that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected places.